So, do your dungeons feel like a chore? Do they maybe even feel a little identical? Critics pejoratively refer to dungeons as apartment complexes for monsters. You go through them, apartment by apartment, killing all the monsters like you're Judge Dredd. Now, that criticism has a fair point to it, I think, but it can be solved with just a little bit of variety. I find it helpful to think of dungeons as coming with different sorts of rooms, each with a different function and virtue, and if you shuffle them efficiently, the dungeon remains fresh. So, to help you out, let me take what I think of as the 10 different kinds of dungeon room features that aren't combat that you can put into your next dungeon, and then show you how I use them, what they're for, and what they're good at. Welcome to Mystic Arts, where I'll defend dungeon crawls till the day I'm isekai'd into a narrative game. My name is Daði, I'm a professional writer and director, and I've been DMing for a little bit over a decade. It's Dungeon Jam 2026, and all the internet's coolest creators are making 5-room dungeons for you. There's a link to a playlist in the description. Go open it up, browse through, find awesome sounding dungeons for you to run while watching videos from creators that you might never have heard of. We wanted to create a list of videos so that when you go browsing it, it feels like going through a vinyl shop and you get to flip through to find the dungeon that's just right for you. So go share the love, go post the playlist in whatever Discords you're in or communities you're in, and then we all benefit by getting a bunch of free dungeons that we can run and use. Anyway, on with the show. You open the door at the end of the corridor, and inside there's a rat vermin mammoth and 3 rat vermin conscripts. Simple enough. Open a door and find some bad guys who were just waiting around to be attacked by the heroes. In this case, ratmen. Obviously inspired by the Skaven of Warhammer, I figured I'd put them into D&D since I've got a big Warhammer army of them. Why not? And I know I said 10 types that aren't combat, but let's get combat out of the way at the start so we can spend the rest of our time talking about the good stuff. Because I think the combat is the classic dungeon encounter. I don't have any hard data to back this claim up, but I think the combat must be the single most common type of dungeon room you could possibly encounter. It is sort of the default, which means it's probably overused. There's nothing wrong with it. The virtue of dungeons is the structure. I've spoken many times before about how valuable it can be as a player to lean back in your chair, comfortable in the knowledge that you've entered the dungeon. And now you can use every part of your character sheet and your big wet head muscle to solve problems room by room. The structure of a dungeon is freeing and relaxing. Combat is the same, even more so. Most of your character sheet is combat stuff, right? Now, I've made countless videos on how to keep combat fresh and interesting. Here's a whole playlist. A couple of weeks ago, it was how you can use video game level design to spice up your normal D&D skirmish. But while that variety in combat is great, and it will keep combat fresh, it won't help us make sure dungeons aren't room after room of just swinging your sword around. We need more than combat variety. We need dungeon room variety. I just had an idea. When we did combat types, I did 2 different rollable spark tables. There was a D8 for combat types, which was boss battle, ambush, puzzle combat, and a D12 for combat objectives, save the NPC, daring escape, stuff like that. What if we use a frankly undersung die, the D10? So why not please the algorithm with a numbered list and please us RPG nerds with a spark table? Here's a D10. Ooh, a 1. This section of wall swivels on an axis, and inside a mound of silver pieces. And in the pile of treasure you see a gem-encrusted amulet, a glowing warhammer, and a wand. Starting off with the cache, a room where the primary purpose is some loot. Just a room full of loot. Or maybe it's behind, a locked door, or a secret wall, or just generally hard to find. Or maybe it's just sitting there, waiting to be claimed by the heroes. Your dungeon should have a cache of loot at some point. Typically, this comes at the end of a dungeon, especially if it's a sort of short kind of 5-room dungeon. But you don't have to. What if it's right at the start? Or after every fight? While working on our new Flintlock Fantasy hex crawl adventure, Crown of the Fungal Queen, we designed one of the 17 dungeons in there to be super deadly. Every fight could be a bloodbath, but every fight rewards the party with tons of loot and magic items, and then the question becomes, do you venture deeper? Or do you take your wins and cut your losses? You choose. Like Who Wants to Be a Millionaire for dungeon crawling. You could totally do that in a dungeon. Or, if it's got multiple levels, you could have a cache on every level, giving the heroes multiple outs. In the 5-room dungeon structure, entrance, puzzle, setback, climax, resolution, you'd expect the treasure to be the resolution. But like we talked about last week, it doesn't have to be that way. You can lay out your dungeon in countless ways. Here's the thing with a cache though. It always works. Players never really question it, and they like getting loot, and they don't like looking gift horses in the mouth. They just love it so heckin' much, it's adorable. So when in doubt, give the players loot. Of course, there's a risk of giving out too much loot too quickly. That's called a Monty Hall game, named after the game show host, Monty Hall from Let's Make a Deal. The idea being that the DM is just giving out so much loot that the players are overpowered. I'll link a wiki article in the description if you want to read about it. But you can combat that by giving out lots of consumables like healing potions, scrolls, or utility items, like a bag of holding or a drift globe. Or you could turn to example number 2 on the D10. Oh, I got queued up. A 2. Inside the cage is a Ratigan wearing a button-up shirt and a hat, and he begs for mercy, screaming, "Please, I'm not one of them. They're going to convert me, but they haven't yet." That's a little guy. But for the table, we'll call this a dungeon-specific sidekick. Someone who can join the heroes for the rest of the dungeon, but won't stay permanently. A sidekick locked away in a side room out of the player's path, not required to complete the dungeon, is kind of a perfect example of exploration gameplay. If the players choose to explore that way, they get a little reward, a little sidekick that can help them in battles to come. Tactically speaking, it's an extra meat shield on the battlefield to tank a couple of hits, but the sidekick could have attacks of their own. This one is called Bastion Banning. He's a Ratigan. He's different from the rat vermin in the rest of the dungeon. The rat vermin, they're like fiends. They exist only to prepare for the inevitable day that the blood war reaches the mortal realm. Ratigan are just normal people. They come from the island of Nyx. Bastion Banning is an accountant, but being born in the industrialized metropolis of Blackguard, he's also pretty decent with a gun, which he carried in his briefcase when he was working out here in the boonies. So when combat starts, Bastion the rat accountant can smoke some fools. When the dungeon is over, Bastion tags along back to town. He and the party go their separate ways. Bastion is an accountant after all, and this adventuring business isn't for him. He's got books to manage. What's great about giving the party a sidekick in the dungeon is that A, you get to play a little silly guy, which is just automatically the best thing ever, and B, it's loot. They're going to be more efficient in combat as long as Bastion lives. Anyway, rolling the dice. 3. Okay, I'm fudging these, but let's forget about the premise and talk about dungeons. You see a large, ornate door at the end of the corridor. And to your right, there's this other passage that just sort of goes further in. You see the boss room, and then the Offshoot, an optional passage. Something you don't have to do, but could be fun. Maybe it's a dead end. Maybe it has secret doors, behind which you could find the cage where the account rat is kept, or the cash is stored. Or maybe there's a big nasty monster that way. Something that matches the boss in strength and CR, but isn't the boss. It's just a thing that lives down here. Remember, the dungeon hates you. What's down your passage's Offshoot is up to you. When you get this result on the spark table, roll a few more times to find out what's down the Offshoot. You could run a whole dungeon off of a spark table. The 2014 Dungeon Master's Guide included a section on randomly creating dungeons. Hell, I made a dungeon exactly like that for issue 4 of the Broadsheets on the Patreon. And I'm running it this weekend. It's great fun. I'm really looking forward to it, actually. Very different style of game, rolling for everything. You don't have to go all in. You don't have to roll on the spark table. Maybe just hearing me talk about the idea of an optional Offshoot inspires you. But that's what spark tables are for. You might roll to be inspired. Let's roll. You're only a couple of leagues from RATHOME, where you know the rat vermin reside, when you see this staggering sight. A wall that goes on and on and on and on, made entirely from rotted meat. This rot wall is a bit of foreshadowing to tell us what's to come. A wall made entirely of rotted meat. In this instance, it isn't in the dungeon. It's outside of it, en route to the dungeon, but you could stick foreshadowing into your dungeon. A mural on the wall that depicts the boss in their final form, or an open sarcophagus just a few rooms before we meet the mummy. Or kobolds. I mean, they're basically dragon foreshadowing, right? No matter what kind of foreshadowing, just have fun with it. And remember that shadows are vague things. They don't tell the whole picture.
A very small man can cast a very large shadow.
If your foreshadowing is too literal and obvious, it might feel like you're explaining stuff, which can be interesting, but it kind of serves a different purpose. Well, we'll get to that in a minute. Foreshadowing is best when it's a little confusing, it's evocative, and it makes sense after the fact. The rot wall doesn't have lots of little rats carved into it. It isn't a big sign saying, the rat people did this. It's just ominous. And when they get to RATHOME, the dungeon, they will see farms and rat vermin farming rot. Now it's a little weird, but evocative, and they connect. Waltzing into the Temple of Vecna, the foreshadowing wouldn't be, Vecna's lore laid out in detail. It'd be statues of great heroes from across the ages, each of them missing a left eye. It'd be a sacrificial bowl where you must place a severed hand to open a door. It points towards Vecna after you know about Vecna, but not before it. Although clever players will piece it together, and piecing it together is what's going to make them feel clever, not when you explain it. That's what foreshadowing is. Otherwise, you're talking about the history of the tomb is arrayed on the walls in a series of frescoes and murals, statues, and a repeated phrase. We must make preserve, we must make prepare, and in the center there is a poem in Infernal. Once translated, you'll understand that it says, the battle war of the underworlds will take the mortal realm world. We will be ready. Yes, yes, we will be ready. The history room is a great way to just explain yourself. Literally just do the exposition. You can do it, it's allowed. It's a bit crass, and you won't feel like much of an artist doing it. It's kind of like being a plumber or an electrician. It's entirely utilitarian. But you can build a gorgeous manor estate with fluted columns and verdant landscaping, accent walls, and feature windows. But if nobody can go potty in the house without doing it on the floor, it's not a good place to live. Have I belabored this metaphor enough? Stories, to a certain degree, need to explain things. A little. You can't get emotionally invested in something that makes no sense. If it makes a bit of sense, you can start to be invested. And so, once in a while, as rarely as we can get away with, we explain the history of the place. How you do it is up to you. Maybe it's a mural, a statue, a fresco, a book, a plaque, a poem, or that one night at the end of Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade. Point is, you just sort of indicate the lore, explain it a bit. A phrase carved on the wall says, the oath of the honey mint harmony, by sap and silver, by root and flame. We seek the source, the truth untamed. Life to essence, essence to whole, in sweetness and sorrow we forge the soul, until we get our hands on the philosopher's stone. And now we're like, okay, this place has some kind of order where they're working on the philosopher's stone. Or with the rats, we include scribblings on the wall all about the blood war reaching the material plane, just sort of to help the players get it. Something to lend a little bit of context to the dungeon. You see this perfectly spherical room, it's about 100 feet in diameter with silver paneling on all the walls. A pathway cuts into the middle of the room, and on an open center platform there's a single floating rock that hovers by itself, the Philosopher's Stone. History's cousin, the Oddity, is a great way to make a dungeon feel unique, significantly important to the shape of your world. I kind of wish I'd thought of a better word for it than oddity. Comment below if you've got a better idea. The oddity is a thing. It's a kind of loot that's stuck inside the dungeon. It is the reason this dungeon exists. It's like an artifact that's built into the shape of the walls and floors of the dungeon. Now, I've only really used this one a few times, and it's always fascinating. With the Philosopher's Stone, it was built into this metal cerebro-looking thing, a sort of calming chamber made to house the stone. But you can do anything with this. When my players explored the ruins of the city of Titans, they found a gargantuan pool of green liquid in the center. Casting plane shift or teleport on the pool would transform the liquid into a permanent portal to a target location until it was dispelled. Not a magic item, it's not a spell, it's not loot, it's just this thing that's in the city of Titans. Little oddity. With the rat vermin in RATHOME, I gave them the rot machine. It is a machine that underpins their whole operation, allowing rat vermin to make weapons out of food, churning out rot in return. Those dang rats! As a quick aside to this, I also like to put in forges, just a place where players can make magic items. We did our own homebrew rules for it, but you don't need to use them. You can just use the ones in the DMG. We'll call that result number 7 on the Spark table. It's basically an oddity because it's stuck in the dungeon, but it's a little different because it is specifically a forge to make magic items. I really like the idea of putting rooms in your dungeon that can't be looted. Whether it's an oddity or a forge, just something special about the place in the dungeon that exists only because the dungeon exists. And it makes it a location your players may want to return to. It becomes this underpinning of the whole shape of the story. They want to come back and engage with the dungeon again in the future. When they do, you could restock the whole dungeon full of new monsters for these subsequent trips, especially if it's like a mega dungeon or something, but it doesn't have to be. Maybe your players cleared the dungeon and turned it into a base around the oddity or forge, a place of their own, which is presumably what the previous inhabitants did. Guess if the players do that, it'll be like a 5e bastion? I don't know, that's up to whatever game you're playing. Rolling the dice. I can't believe it took me this long to mention that factions are an excellent way to spruce up your dungeon. Maybe your dungeon isn't just rats. Maybe there's other stuff in here. Another faction that hates the rats and the PCs. Or maybe even hates the rats more than they hate the PCs. Maybe that's something for your players to engage with. I love sticking factions into my dungeons. I didn't put any other factions, living in RATHOME because it's just not big enough for that, I felt. But I put in portals. I could have put portals on the Spark table, but there is no D11. Let's say our rat vermin in RATHOME have a portal in their basement and it leads to a nearby druid grove. They occasionally send rats through to go kill druids and take their delicious food and feed it to the rot machine. Factional conflict. Just putting one new faction into a dungeon can suddenly elevate the whole experience. You stick one faction in there and there's a conflict in the dungeon. Rats don't like druids, there's theft, machinery, plot, and suddenly the whole thing comes alive. If you've got a dungeon you're working on and it's just room after room of goblins waiting to be killed by the heroes, just try sticking in one other faction in there and watch as the conflict and drama that springs from it inspires you. Ask yourself questions. Why is a second faction here? What do they want? How are they going to get it? And then it all starts coming together.
Oh yeah, it's all coming together.
In the dead adventurer's pocket, you see a small hand-scribbled bit of parchment, and on it there's little trees and a house marked rats. But there's more. There's a place marked as logging site and another one marked as werewolves. Finding a new map in a dungeon can be a great gift, especially in a hex crawl style of play because it's an invitation to leave the dungeon and go back into the hex crawl, swapping between the exploration types, doing another dungeon crawl in another location. It's like this connective tissue. But more than that, it's like crooking your fingers at the players. You hand them a map with new dungeons marked on it, and you're telling them, why don't you keep exploring? There's so much stuff in this adventure. Come have fun in more locations, come on. Maps are a great way to reinforce the gameplay loop of a hex crawl game. Here's how. You go into the forest, hex crawling. You find a dungeon, dungeon crawling. You go find a map in the dungeon, so you go back to hex crawling. That's a gameplay loop. Put maps into your dungeons. They don't even have to be actual maps. They can be inaccurate, sure, you can just sort of scribble them on an index note, but they can also just be descriptions. A tribe of werewolves hides 3 leagues northwest of here. That's basically a map. Or maybe loggers nearby. Be quiet, scribbled on the wall. That's a map. Nearby, what does that mean? We go walk around. Go explore this hex, explore that hex. Bum, 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 bum. Ah, loggers. If you want to get this rat vermin dungeon I've been talking about this entire video, I have put a link in the description to RATHOME, a free Patreon post where you can grab the whole thing, download it, and stick it right into your game. And if you want 16 more dungeons like it, all knitted together in a big sprawling hex crawl adventure for 1st to 5th level characters, then I need to tell you about The Crown of the Fungal Queen, a starter adventure for my setting. I made it on live streams over the course of 6 months with folks in chat helping to design the adventure. And we even hosted a contest for people in chat where they could submit their own dungeons to the finished module. The whole adventure takes the lessons we talk about on the channel, like hexploration, dungeoneering, excursion resting, and it puts them all into practice in an adventure that you can run at your table. It's written for beginner DMs who just want to get started with a more classic style of adventuring for 5th edition. There's no sponsor on this week's video. I'm really hoping that you folks understand the kind of stuff we do here at the channel because I am so proud of this adventure, and supporting it, grabbing it on the Patreon is the best thing you can do to support this channel. It is available for Adept members or purchase separately a la carte, and I'll link all of those in the description as well, just underneath RATHOME. Finally, the puzzle is a tried and true dungeon set piece, and I'm really bad at making them, but I think they're neat. When we did the Ruins of Brass for broadsheet number 4, my writing partner Magnus designed a bunch of them, which is great because normally I just steal from pre-written modules, and now I can steal from my own pre-written module. But if I had to boil down my advice for puzzles into some kind of advice for this kind of educational and entertainment thing that we do, I'd say this. A dungeon puzzle is really just a locked door with the flavor changed. Anything more intricate is often a distraction, and it tends to pull people out of the game. I tend to avoid designing puzzles that are versions of Simon Says or matching the rhythm or like logic puzzles. I'd much rather say there's a door and it won't open unless the forge is on, since the forge powers the mechanism that opens this gargantuan door. Locked door and a key, but the forge won't turn on because there is a leakage in the pipes. If a player character thinks they can find and repair the leak, the forge can be turned back on. Locked door and a key. But the broken pipe is surrounded by magmins. Kill the magmins to access the pipe. Locked door and magmins. Combat. Locked door and combat. String a few together and it feels like a puzzle while never stopping all the play around the table. It just halts forward progression a bit with something other than combat. These puzzles never fail me, specifically because they're quick and simple and fun. Now I've just talked about 10 different rooms you can stick in your dungeon that aren't combat, but like I said at the start, combat's a great way for players to just sit back and know they can solve problems with their character sheet. It's relaxing. I love running combat. I think it's a lot of fun. And there's countless different combats you can run with different objectives, different types, different bad guys, different terrains and interactables, not to mention different monsters. There really are infinite permutations, and you could run a dungeon that's all combat all the time, and it'll be a hack and slash style of play, and if that's what you like, it'll be awesome. I just wanted to make a video about other kinds of rooms you can put in your dungeon so that you have more options for the game. But that's not everything. It's up to you. Some dungeons are puzzles. Even combats are puzzles. You know, White Plume Mountain is awesome, and all the combats in there are essentially a puzzle. It's weird, but it's amazing. There's a whole buttload of dungeons like that called Funhouse dungeons. And if that's what you love, go run that. My friend Taryn Pounds, author of Vagabond, wrote a dungeon just like that called The Rook and the Crook. And it's really dope. He also wrote Wet Dreams, which is way more hack and slash, lots of evil fishmen and undead. Both are fun. You don't need to pick. You can just like many things. I mostly run really long campaigns, which means I swap styles of play around a lot to keep things fresh. Sometimes I run hack and slash dungeons. Sometimes I throw in a bit of Funhouse. Sometimes it's a bunch of 5-room dungeons to get out of my way and let us get in and out quickly. Another thing that's important, especially for big dungeons, is the idea of JQuazing the dungeon. Basically drawing up a map in such a way that there's a bunch of side entrances and loops and alternative exits, different ways between floors. You can get really into the weeds of this stuff, and it's a lot of fun. So the next time you design a dungeon, try rolling on this D10 spark table of Cache, Sidekick, Offshoot, Foreshadowing, History, Oddity, Forge, Factions, Map, and Puzzle, and use it to inspire rooms when you're designing. Stick a combat encounter into some of the rooms and draw a map that JQuazes the hell out of it. And you'll be making legendary dungeons in no time at all. And that's where we'll pick it up next time. This channel is run by me and my girlfriend. If you want a bunch of dungeons, click on the playlist here to get the experience, the joy of browsing for dungeons to run for your next game. There are so many, you could run one a week, and you have enough dungeons until we do this next year. Until next time, keep studying the mystic arts.